You're standing on a public sidewalk. You're filming a police encounter. It's broad daylight. You're not doing anything wrong. And then an officer walks straight toward you. He looks right at the camera. He looks right at you. And he says the words that make most people's stomachs drop. I need to see your ID right now. What do? Do you hand it over? Do you refuse? Do you say nothing? Here's the brutal truth. Most Americans right now would hand over that ID without a second thought, and in doing so, they would silently surrender a constitutional right that millions of people fought and died to protect. But not you. Not after today, because in the next 12 minutes, I'm going to give you the exact 7 words you need to say, grounded in U.S. Supreme Court rulings, federal circuit court decisions, and the actual text of the Constitution, so you know precisely what to do in that moment. And stick with me to the end, because I'm also going to tell you the one mistake people make after saying those 7 words, a mistake that can get you arrested even when you're completely within your rights. Before we get to those 7 words, you need to understand the legal bedrock you're standing on, because when you know why you have these rights, you'll never be shaken out of them. Let's start with the First Amendment. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Now here's what most people don't know. Courts have consistently ruled that the act of filming is a form of speech protected under the First Amendment. You don't need a press badge. You don't need to work for CNN. You, as a private citizen, have the constitutional right to record. Let me prove it to you with real cases. In 2011, a case called Glick v. Kniff went before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. Attorney Simon Glick was standing in a Boston public park about 10 feet away, filming police officers making an arrest with his cell phone. He wasn't interfering, he wasn't touching anyone, he was simply recording. The officers arrested him for illegal wiretapping. He sued, and the court ruled, and this is critical, that a private citizen has a clearly established right to record police officers carrying out their duties in a public space. The court used the words basic, vital, and well-established liberty. Those aren't weak words. That's the federal court system telling every officer in America, recording is protected. Then, in 2012, ACLU versus Alvarez, the Seventh Circuit ruled that making audio and audio-visual recordings of public officials is expressive conduct protected by the First Amendment. Not just publishing the footage, the act of recording itself. And in 2017, Fields versus City of Philadelphia, the Third Circuit held that members of the public have the right to record police activities in public places, and that this right covers every single American, not just the press. As of today, 6 of the 12 U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals have explicitly recognized your right to film police in public. The First, Third, Fifth, Seventh, Ninth, and 11th Circuits. That covers the vast majority of the American population. This is not fringed legal theory. This is established American law. All right, you've been waiting for this. Here are the 7 words. A police officer approaches you while you're filming and demands your ID. You look them calmly in the eye and you say, "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" That's it. 7 words. And here's why they are so incredibly powerful. Under the United States Constitution and decades of Supreme Court precedent, there are only 3 types of police encounters you can legally be in. Number 1 is a consensual encounter. The officer is just talking to you. You are under no legal obligation to respond. You can walk away. You do not have to show ID. You have no legal duty to cooperate at all. Number 2 is an investigatory detention, also called a Terry stop, where the officer briefly detains you because they have what courts call reasonable and articulable suspicion that you've committed, are committing, or are about to commit a crime. In this situation, in states that have stop and ID laws, you may be required to give your name. I'll explain exactly which states in just a moment. And number 3 is an arrest, where the officer has probable cause that you committed a crime and you're being taken into custody. When you ask, "Am I being detained?" you are forcing the officer to legally classify the interaction right then and there. He has to say, yes, you're being detained, in which case he needs to have actual reasonable suspicion, or he has to say, no, you're free to go. If he says you free to go, You're free to go. Keep filming from a safe distance if you choose. You have no obligation to stay. If he says you are detained, then and only then does the question of ID become legally relevant, and only in certain states. Now here's where it gets nuanced, and this is the part most videos skip, which is exactly why people get into trouble. You asked, "Am I being detained?" And the officer says, "Yes." Now what? Here's the legal landscape. Approximately 24 states have what are called stop and ID statutes. These are laws that allow a police officer who has reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to require you to identify yourself. The key legal authority here comes from two landmark Supreme Court cases. First, Terry versus Ohio in 1968, where the Supreme Court established that police may briefly detain a person based on specific and articulable facts suggesting criminal activity. Not a hunch, not a feeling, specific facts the officer can describe out loud. And second, Heibel versus 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada in 2004, where the Supreme Court ruled that states can require a detained person to disclose their name, but only their name in most jurisdictions, and only during a valid Terry stop based on reasonable suspicion of a crime. Not suspicion of filming, not suspicion of being outside, an actual crime. Now, and this is absolutely critical, simply filming in a public place does not, by itself, constitute reasonable suspicion of a crime. Filming alone is not a crime. It cannot serve as the sole basis for a detention. Multiple federal courts have confirmed this principle repeatedly. So what does this mean practically? If you're in a stop and ID state and the officer has legitimate reasonable suspicion of an actual criminal activity, you may be legally required to provide your name. In most of these states, you only have to provide your name verbally. You typically do not have to hand over a physical ID. States without stop and ID laws as of 2024 include California, New York, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Washington, and Massachusetts, among others. In those states, if you're not driving, you generally have the right to remain silent about your identity entirely. States with stop and ID laws include Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Florida, Georgia, and others, approximately 24 in total. And 7 states, Arizona, Florida, Indiana, Louisiana, New Mexico, Ohio, and Vermont, have laws that can impose criminal penalties for refusing to identify yourself when lawfully detained. This is why knowing your specific state matters enormously. Ask, "Am I being detained?" first, find out if you're detained, then evaluate whether your state requires identification. And remember, that requirement is almost always limited to your name only. Now, remember at the very beginning I told you there's a mistake people make after saying those 7 words that can get them arrested, even when they're completely within their rights? Here it is. They argue. I cannot stress this enough. The moment you start debating constitutional law on the sidewalk with a police officer, you have already lost. Not because you're wrong, you might be 100% legally correct, but because the side of the road is not a courtroom. Here's how it plays out. You ask, "Am I being detained?" The officer says yes. You say, "You can't detain me. I'm exercising my First Amendment rights." The officer says, "You're interfering with a police investigation." You say, "No, I'm not." And 5 minutes later, you're in handcuffs being charged with obstruction. The ACLU, civil rights attorneys, and constitutional law experts across the country all say the same thing. Assert your rights clearly, state them once, then comply and challenge it in court. The street is where you can lose your freedom. The courtroom is where you can win your rights back and potentially win significant damages. Simon Glick, the attorney we talked about earlier, was compensated after his wrongful arrest. The officers who arrested him were denied qualified immunity by the federal court. Know your rights. State them calmly. Don't physically resist. Don't escalate. Record everything. And the moment you're free, call a civil rights attorney. Let me give you 5 practical rules that every person filming police encounters in public should know. Rule 1. Stay in a public place. Your First Amendment filming rights are strongest in traditional public forums, sidewalks, parks, and public streets. If you step onto private property or enter a restricted area, the legal analysis changes entirely. Keep your feet on public ground. Rule 2, don't interfere. Every court that has recognized the right to film has included a caveat. You cannot materially interfere with police activities. Stay at a reasonable distance. The Glick court noted he was 10 feet away. Don't get in the way. Don't touch anyone. Don't block the scene. Rule 3. Announce clearly that you are recording. Saying, "I am recording this interaction," out loud protects you on multiple levels and creates a clear record. Rule 4. Never physically resist. If an officer attempts to seize your camera or physically detain you, do not physically resist. Calmly state, "I do not consent to this." Say it clearly, say it on camera. Then comply. You can challenge the legality of any seizure or detention in court, where you will have actual remedies. Physical resistance on the street only gives officers justification for additional charges. Rule 5. Preserve your footage immediately. The moment an encounter ends, protect that footage. Upload it right away. Consider using a live streaming app so footage uploads in real time. If your phone is seized or damaged, the footage is already preserved. So what happens if the officer ignores all of this? What if you're detained or arrested for filming when you had every right to film? Step 1. Stay silent. Beyond identifying yourself, if legally required in your state, invoke your right to remain silent. Say, "I am invoking my right to remain silent and I want an attorney." Then stop talking. Every word you say can and will be used against you. Step 2. Cooperate physically, not verbally. You can comply with physical instructions while simultaneously refusing to answer questions. Complying physically is not the same as waiving your Fifth Amendment rights. Step 3. Document everything you can the moment you're released. Names, badge numbers, patrol car numbers, the time, the location, the names of any witnesses. Write it all down. Step 4. Contact a civil rights attorney immediately. Organizations like the ACLU, the National Lawyers Guild, and many private civil rights attorneys take cases involving violations of First Amendment recording rights, often on contingency, meaning no upfront cost to you. You have remedies, you have rights, and now you have the knowledge to protect them. Let me leave you with this. The First Amendment was not written to protect popular speech or easy conversations. It was written for exactly the moments when a camera is pointed at power and power wants it to stop. Every court case I cited today happened because someone refused to be intimidated, because someone knew their rights well enough to stand on them. You now have that same knowledge. So the next time an officer demands your ID while you're filming, take a breath. Look them in the eye and say, "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" 7 words, a constitution behind them, and now the knowledge to use them. If this video helped you, drop a comment below telling me which state you're in, because the next video breaks down stop and identify laws state by state with the specific statutes and penalties you need to know. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.